If it's all right with you, we will continue today's symposium with the last part dedicated to the hands-on practice with two corpora. One of them, of course, the Croatian National Biographical Project, conducted by the Miroslav Krleža Institute. The director of the Krleža Institute, Dr. Filip Hameršak, will be presenting. And for the second part, our very own Dr. Petra Testein-Koren will give a presentation about the new Slovenian Biographical Lexicon. More of which to come later. I give the floor to Filip.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, founded in 1950 by the federal government of Yugoslavia, the Institute of Lexicography in Zagreb, later named after erudite Croatian writer Miroslav Krleža, its initiator and the first director, is one of the key places for biographical research in Croatia. Of course, interest in biography and even interest in biographical dictionaries of a sort is of a much older date, if we consider the territory of what is today the Republic of Croatia. For instance, already in 1541, one Ambros Ranjina did publish almost 2,000 of short biographies of the Dominican monks of Dubrovnik region, then an independent city-state, now a part of southern Croatia. In 1605, Ambros Gučetić followed the suit, publishing a volume with biographies of 790 Dominican monks from all around the world, noted for their literary work. 16 of them being from Dubrovnik and another 6 from historic Dalmatia, or southern Croatia, that is. In 17th and 18th century, this was followed by several authors making their own collections of short biographies of Dubrovnik or Split or Dalmatian men of letters, and even other notable individuals. But most of them were printed only in 19th century or later, save for the 1767 Sebastian Slade Dolci volume consisting of 272 biographies of Dubrovnik writers. A bit later, since mid-18th century, similar endeavors had been taken by North Croatian scholars like Baltazar Adam Krčerić, Adam Alojzij Baričević, and Toma Mikloušić, ever increasingly taking into account not only local and regional clergymen, but also lay writers. Early 19th century was marked by biographical compendiums of Franjo Maria Appendini, a Piedmont-born citizen of Dubrovnik, and of Mihovil Kunić, a Slovakian-born citizen of Zagreb, Varaždin, and Karlovac. The first published mostly in Italian on Dalmatian writers, the second mostly in German on the illustrious people from all over the Habsburg monarchy, including those from Croatian lands. In fact, Kunić's work has later been recognized as a direct precursor to the renowned Wurzbach Biographical Lexicon, of which the first volume was published in 1856. Illustrious people of Istria were also given coverage by Petar Stanković in late 1820s. As we can see, exposed to conquests for centuries and brought together only in the early 19th century under Habsburg rule, Croatia and Slavonia and Dalmatia and Istria were in many ways behind the development trends in Western and Northern Europe, where multi-volume encyclopedias and dictionaries had often been printed already in the 18th century. Still, despite the more or less pronounced expressions of the hegemonic strivings of Vienna and Pest, from the 1830s, the legalist insistence on centuries-long state continuity became increasingly intertwined with broader cultural political activity, which in the sense of national integration or nation building continued to be linked to the real, though sometimes disputed, subjectivity of the kingdoms of Croatia and Slavonia, and the symbolic subjectivity of the triune kingdom of Croatia, Slavonia, and Dalmatia until the end of World War I. There were also thoughts about expanding this Croatian core into a broader Illyrian or later Yugoslav integration, as well as about winning over the Bosnian and Herzegovinian Muslims. Besides newspapers and journals financed through relatively small but well-established subscriber circles who were, along with patronage, besides newspapers and journals financed through relatively small but well-established subscriber circles who were, along with patronage, the main source of new civil associations such as Matica Hrvatska, Matrix Croatica, and the Society of St. Jerome, there was a strengthening of state institutions such as the Yugoslav Academy of Sciences and Arts, the University of Zagreb, and gymnasiums, high schools, especially after the Croatian-Hungarian settlement of 1868. Within the frame of such increased interest in national identity-based conception of the past, already in the 1850s and 1860s, historians Šime Ljubić and Ivan Kukuljević-Sakcinski published biographical compendiums of limited extent. Renowned people of Dalmatia, Yugoslav artists, and famous Croats of the past centuries. In the period from 1898 to 1900, journalist and writer Milan Grlović compiled an impressive album of worthy Croats of the 19th century for a private publisher in Zagreb, containing 150 biographies, sometimes written in a rather free style, but covering the entire area of the Triune Kingdom, with much data and politically balanced, including even the biography of Eugen Kvaternik, a rebel against the then ruler Francis Joseph I. Almost at the same time, and also in Zagreb, historian Andra Gavrilović published similar volumes on 216 renowned Serbs of the same period. During the initial years of the 20th century, librarian Velimir Deželić Sr. started collecting data for a Croatian biographical dictionary. Next to publishing some biographies in the popular press, he strived for a more wider support. But following the generous donation of retired General Marko Crljan, the Zagreb-seated Yugoslav Academy of Sciences and Arts opted instead for a national type encyclopedia that would also include Slovenian, Serbian, and Bulgarian topics and should have been made together with respective national academies or matrices. However, the plan was abandoned because of the Second Balkan War and the First World War, and the work on Croatian Biographical Dictionary was continued under auspices of the Yugoslav Academy until early 1920s, when it was finally stopped, most probably because of the political situation in the newly formed Yugoslav state. As a consequence, in 1925, on the occasion of the 1000th anniversary of the founding of the Croatian Kingdom, most of the Deželić's material was included in one huge, privately published volume of the famous and meritorious Croats, the first Croatian large-scale national biographical lexicon, consisting of some 2,200 entries. The introductory historical overview was critical towards the way in which the common South-Slav state had been established, but also optimistic because Stjepan Radić, the leading Croatian politician of the time, had recently recognized the Serbian Karađorđević dynasty. A significant introductory space was devoted to Istria and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the publication included numerous Bosnian and Herzegovinian Muslims. The author of these entries, Safet Bey Bašagić, published his own biographical dictionary in Zagreb in 1931, entitled Famous Bosnian and Herzegovinian Croats in the Turkish Empire. From 1920s to mid-1940s, several general or national type encyclopedias or lexicons were published containing topics on Croatian themes, including biographies that are well worth analyzing, especially in the terms of their, so to say, positivistic objectivity, in spite of the wider social and political context. But the constraints of time do not allow for their proper treatment, save to hint they were about Austrian-Hungarian generals who fought against Serbia, such as in this case, and the allied political and military leaders opposed to the Axis-sided independent state of Croatia, as in this case. Be it as it may, when founded in 1950, the Institute of Lexicography in Zagreb got the official primary task to publish a multi-volume encyclopedia of Yugoslavia, which it managed to do from 1955 to 1971. Some of the included larger biographies were founded on dedicated research and remained standard sources of information for decades. Some combined research, or at least general information, with Yugoslav Marxist ideological verdicts that were later abandoned or revised even before the fall of communism. However, albeit on a limited scale, even the so-called negative historical personalities were included. In the 1950s, a more neutral bibliographical project was also completed, giving a long-lasting basis for biographical research. By effort of around 700 contributors and a very skilled editorial staff, led by Director Krleža's deputy Mate Ujević, practically all available South Slavic less Bulgarian periodicals, including newspapers, from the late 18th century to 1945, were processed, excerpting approximately 2,200,000 units of reference that were later copied on 10 million cards. Therefore, every unit or text, that is, could be found according to its author, its thematic keyword, or according to its field or genre. Some 100,000 authors have thus been discerned, while the anonymous texts were listed according to the title. In order to identify authors hidden behind pseudonyms and codes, many of the still living pre-1945 newspaper editors and other intellectuals were consulted, although some of them were blacklisted by the communist authorities. As a result, mostly devoid of any ideologically driven selection key, by this virtually unique project, many lesser-known individuals were saved from oblivion, while for the better-known ones, more complete corpuses were established, including text about them, reviews, and biographical contributions from which basic data, such as occupation, birth and death date, as seen here, were also noted. Between 1956 and 2004, a selected 20% of these units of reference, limited to year 1940, were published in 16 volumes on various fields. During 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, biographical entries were also present in other editions of the Institute of Lexicography, in a way analogous to Encyclopedia of Yugoslavia, but in a smaller extent. Some of these biographies, especially those in multi-volume Maritime Encyclopedia and the Encyclopedia of Music, also had a research component. Moreover, in 1955, Ujević prepared a single 860 pages volume containing only quotations on various matters from the works of famous Croatian writer Antun Gustav Matoš. Not willing to renounce his support for the declaration on the Croatian language, in 1967 Krleža resigned from the Central Committee of the League of Communists of Croatia, and his public presence was reduced for a certain degree. Although Krleža did not overtly participate in the Croatian Spring movement, it seems that at the time he became more and more wary about the possibility of the so-called Yugoslav synthesis. In 1972, the finances of the Institute of the Lexicography were relegated from federal to the Croatian Republic level. Also, at that year, Director Krleža publicly spoke to Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito about the aforementioned 10 million bibliographical cards, stating it would be a great basis for a bibliographical dictionary. Obviously following Krleža's instructions, already in 1973, Kruno Krstić, one of the leading experts of the Institute, prepared a plan for a multi-volume Croatian biographical, respective bibliographical lexicon. Arguably by no accidents, it was the first and only project of the Institute until the 1990s to hold the attribute Croatian and to cover only Croatia-related topics. Initially, 8 volumes were nominally planned, but soon it became obvious that a dozen or more would be more realistic, especially following the idea of both Krleža and Krstić that many of the so-called little people should also be included, and that the so-called negative persons are not to be excluded. In 1977, the first editor-in-chief, literary historian Nikica Kolumpić, was appointed, refining the general conception, article content and structure, and leading a group of employees that searched through around 300 published sources, as well as library catalogs, thus preparing a list of approximately 25,000 individuals. During this preparatory phase, the project was known as the Bibliographical Lexicon of Croatia, and it was also decided that living persons are to be included, if born earlier than 1946. Also, as a good starting point, around 2,000 entries and questionnaires for the terminated 1916 Croatian Biographical Dictionary were acquired from the Yugoslav Academy of Arts and Scientists. In 1978, this is that, a well-prepared and well-attended consultative meeting was held, including respected members of political and cultural life. Every participant was given extensive written explanations, list of sources, etc., and there were no objections recorded. After that, the work has been intensified, including 20 or more permanent staff members and 273 contributors. As a result, the first volume, including letters A to BI, with 1,763 articles on 800 pages, was published in December 1983, including the title, under the title of Croatian Biographical Lexicon. Dying in 1981, Director Krleža was in no position either to approve or disapprove its final content. Be it as it may, in the foreword, the scope of the lexicon was defined to include prominent Croats, individuals and families, or people of Croatian origin, living and acting all around the globe, also prominent members of other nations and nationalities born on the territory of the Socialist Republic of Croatia, as well as foreigners that lived and acted on this soil. Although not stated in the foreword as a practical rule, bottom timeline was post-migration of people's early Middle Ages, and apart from some exceptions, neither the individuals nor the families were explicitly described in terms of their ethnicity. However, soon after the public promotion, Serious attacks started in the press. The first blow was given by writer Goran Babic, who stated that such rightists and clerical books such as the CBL could have been published only because Krleža was now dead. The Praxis School philosopher Milan Kangarga followed the suit, stating that it would be unacceptable for him to be including in the same volume as some negative personalities. Another authors objected to having too many clergymen and too little workers or revolutionaries, that not stating ethnicity equals the role of Croatian Serbs to Italians or Hungarians, that the language editing was too archaic and even too puristic in the independent state of Croatia manner. One of the most common, but also one of the most unclear objections was that the lexicon is not Marxist enough. On the other hand, direct allegations of Croatian nationalism were rare and practically reserved for radicals such as Babic, who in fact himself wrote at least one pretty nationalistic poem during the Croatian Spring. To be sure, some of the more technical remarks were founded, and soon it was obvious that the core of the state and Communist Party officials did not really want the volume to be banned. In mid-1984, a round table was organized by the League of Communists of Croatia Center for Ideal and Theoretical Work, resulting in a curious publication named Aporias of the Croatian Biographical Lexicon. Conclusively, the work on the second volume has been continued with a new foreword and with the control, or perhaps more likely, a cover body of respected scientists called the Council. Under new editor-in-chief, archaeologist and librarian Aleksandar Stipčević, the list of persons was revised and enlarged with a number of fifth-rate communist political workers and Yugoslav People's Army officers, resulting in a total of 829 articles, which were supposed to be ready for print in mid-88. However, according to Stipčević, who later wrote an entire book on the subject, this is the book, afraid of another scandal, the management of the institute decided to stall with print, which was over only in December 1989 in the wake of political pluralism. After that, from Volume 3, published in 1993, to Volume 8, published in 2013, the work have been continued under the third editor-in-chief, a historian, Trpimir Macan, in a more stable circumstances. Macan's visions of CBL rightly put more emphasis on the research and interpretive components, requiring, for instance, the contributors to read and retell as many works authored by the subjects as possible, to note location of their manuscripts and letters, also the controversial opinions about them, and even their possible reception in arts, such as literary figures, paintings, medals, and so on. As a result, a standard number of entries per volume fell from 17 or even 1800 to 1200, individual articles being longer and more time-consuming to write. All in all, those planned 25,000 articles, including possible supplements, will need around 20 volumes and a time span of another 40 years to be published, which is a price to be paid for such thick biographical covering of the past population of Croatia. For instance, the Bibliographical Lexicon of Italians includes some 40,000 biographies, while the British Dictionary of National Biography has around 60,000 articles. Given the proportions, similar type of CBL should have no more than 3,000 articles. During those 20 years of Macan's editorialship, only 3 or 4 negative appraisals were recorded. The one in 2003 closely resembling the discourse of Babić and Kangerga. In that case, all members of editorial staff were called by name for not including one film director and one actress on the grounds of not being good enough Croats. While on the other hand, the author said, Ustaša leaders have been given space. This appraisal also criticized the Croatian government for financing such projects. However, having later been warned that the real reason for not including those two was the 1945 birth year limit, as stated in the foreword, this author reacted with a sincere apology. Available on the internet since 2008, CBL continued to publish new articles, reaching a total number of 12,500 with volume 9, printed in 2021 under 4th editor-in-chief Nikša Lučić, also a historian. During time, key challenges have also changed. First of all, general public interest in such editions have been reduced, even if they're available online. Many CBL articles were used in Croatian Wikipedia, but often changed, or at least without proper note. Borrowing whole sentences without specifying the source is regular practice of Google info panels, not to mention ChatGPT and other AI systems. Second of all, source digitalization projects were of uneven scope and quality, opening vast but hardly searchable material on one side, and on the other side not liquidating the need to physically go to archive or library, where material could be unavailable because it was sent to the outsourced digitalization company or just in too bad a condition. Furthermore, some fields, especially medicine, natural and technical sciences, have limited interest for their past and earlier developments, which makes contributors hard to find. Even in the fields of history and literary science, biographical and bibliographical research remains a kind of unattended foster child. The term biographical turn haven't yet been heard of. Having also in mind that contributors' fee have for years been a small change of 1 cent per one character, their average number per volume have decreased to 200. While the permanent staff rose to around 24 editors and associates. However, in terms of approach, the Macan's vision is still being realized, albeit with one difference. Because the leadership of the Institute thought the project to be too slow and not visible enough, in 2013 it was decided to make an internet-only supplement that will include 100 of the most prominent biographies, all the way to the letter Z or Ž. It was a bold move, not yet completely realized, having also side effect of slowing the work on volume 9 for at least 2 years. Next to that, CBL and the Institute joined several large online biographical projects such as Daraja Eminent People and, of course, Intavia. Also, in order to foster future research, since 2001, an even larger Croatian Personal Database, this here, have been developed containing 52,000 notable persons without upper time limit. The newest challenge is certainly the General Data Protection Regulation, giving some people ideas to try to forbid writing about themselves in a way they want to approve of. As it is still a moot point, how far can this right go until some balance is reached? At last, having used almost all of my time, I will just mention that on the margins of CBL, several monographs and collected papers were published treating the themes of biography in a more extensive way, or publishing manuscripts that were discovered during research, and that the Institute scientific periodical is preparing a number dedicated to biography. Also, in the last 20 years or so, several of the so-called personal encyclopedias were published, dedicated to Krleža, Matoš, 16th century writer Marin Držić, and 18th century scientist Ruđer Bošković. All in all, great thanks to our Slovenian colleagues for giving Nataša and me an opportunity to speak here and today, as we believe further both official and unofficial exchange of experiences will follow.